Everyone, it is Maree here from Skeins. You're with the Quarantine Diaries, day 36, Thursday, the 30th of April, last day of April. Wow, where did that go? Where did that month go? If you're tuning in and you're expecting to see me with Rachel Heron today, Rachel sends her apologies, but she will be here tomorrow. She wasn't able to make it today, but definitely will be here tomorrow, all going well. So, in the meantime, I popped out a tile this morning across the social media. And I thought I would do a question and answer session because I've had a number of questions that have come in across inquiries at Skeins over the last week, particularly now that we've been open back at level 3, with a whole variety of different questions that you've had just in terms of yarn and all those different sorts of things. And I thought, well, and we had it yesterday. You guys were wonderful yesterday. So many questions that came in. And I thought that it would be a really, really good chance if you've got a question about anything, delivery, yarns, advice, cooking, wine, dogs, I really don't mind. You can ask whatever you like. Whether or not I can answer it accurately could be another story. But you know what? We'll give anything a go. So I thought that would be quite fun to do today. And I've got a couple of other things. I just wanted to show you my Rambler progress. And what was the other? Oh, yes. And one of the questions actually brought up another idea if we get short for time as well. So that's what I thought we would do today. So if you've got a question, a burning question you would like to ask, pop it in the comments. I will do my best to track it down. And yeah, see if I can answer it for you. Now, I'm being really brave this morning. It is a stunningly beautiful day here today, and I have decided to leave the she shed door open. Yeah, brave. So I've already got one dog on the mat in front of me at the desk guarding, and the other one is likely to bumble and barge through at any given time. So let's see how we go, shall we? But let's get kicked off with some questions. And the first one I got in from Instagram this morning was from Jo. And she is saying here, I think I might need to unpick my swatches to finish my black pearl cardigan. Should I soak the yarn to remove the wrinkles before knitting it into my cardigan? The short answer to that, Jo, is yes, I would. And I even bought an example. Did I bring an example? I know I bought an example. Where did I put it? Of exactly what you're talking about. And did I pick? Oh, there it is, hiding under my other examples. And the short answer is yes. And Suzanne Bryan actually brought it up the other day. She is a techniques expert master knitter from the US. And one of the things she's been doing is working on different swatches around gauge and seeing how different conditions within yarn can affect gauge. And one of the things that she was doing was knitting yarn that was just regular straight off the ball, then unraveling that same yarn after it had been knit into a garment for some time, then reknitting it and seeing what effect that would have, and then doing both of those examples and doing one where the yarn has been unraveled and then blocked, and just sort of testing all of these things out. The general rule of thumb is you are, so there we go, there's a really good example. So this is something that I'm unraveling at the minute. It comes out of that ball there, and I'm doing that. If you're asking why, Maree, are you doing such a thing, and it's because I've decided my next full garment project is going to be this. So I just know that I will need the entire ball to be able to do that. So I am unraveling this at the minute, and yes, what I would do, I mean, I have a niddy noddy. I don't know whether you have one of those, but it's like it's a spinning thing, and it's sort of basically like a rod like this, and you've got it's, if you could imagine like a T but at 90-degree angles, and it's a hank maker, and so I'm just going to do that. And now I'm not going to do the full hank size. I'm just going to go over two of the arms just to wind off a very short little hank. If you don't have one of those, you can just do it when I find the end of this, because I've already got my tits in at angle. This is the other reason why you do it. When it's all wibbly wobbly like this, it tangles so more readily than what it does when it's not. I literally started untangling this, and then I threw it in a pile, and I thought, oh, and then what happened is it got caught, the end of it, you'll laugh, the end of this, I'm mumbling, the end of this got caught. We have got one of those little Roomba vacuum cleanery things, there it is. And the end, this endy bit here, was dangling off the end of the couch and got caught in the Roomba. So the Roomba starts merrily along and unraveling it for me. So it was unraveled mostly by the Roomba, but of course it's meant that it's all a bit tangled. Right, that's enough to show you. If you don't have a niddy noddy, use the elbow noddy. Works just fine. So you make yourself a little hank, and I essentially just, you can just soak this in straight water. I always just pop a couple of drops of fabric softener in there because that's me, because I like the smell. I'm very fragrance oriented, or a little bit of hair conditioner if you choose to. Don't need to. You leave it to soak. I put it in lukewarm water, and then I basically leave it until the water goes cold. But essentially you want it to soak completely, and then pull it out, give it a good flick, and then let it dry, and it'll just smooth all those kinks out. And it just means that when you go to finish your garment, that none of those kinks will appear, because when you go to knit your garment, those kinks will actually alter your gauge, and particularly on a yarn like black pearl, which is twist on twist and very, very tubular. And in fact, this is perfect cardigan to show you there. This, and you can see this in this cardigan because this is the same construction as the black pearl yarn. See how your stockinette, as they call these railway tracks, are very, very defined. That if you haven't unkinked your yarn, you will see that there will be subtle differences in your stitching, and it will actually give you an optical effect, and you'll be able to see it. Whereas at least by soaking it from your swatch, it will allow you to be able to minimize that as much as you can. So that's what I would strongly suggest that you do. And while we're going down this rabbit hole with that, when it comes to unraveling stuff, it can actually be other projects that you've got. I have actually, oh God, look, I've got hair everywhere. I was not very organized this morning. I got caught up watching David Lomas again. I'll talk about that in a minute. It's my weekly indulgence. Yes, if you're unraveling garments, you know when you've got that garment that you've made like years ago and the size is not right, or you're just not 100% happy with it, or whatever it may be, or you've done something and you've just fired it in the naughty corner because it's sat there for ages and just, I mean, we've all got them. Been there, done that. You can actually unravel them, especially if they're a garment that's been in the rounds. There's not a lot of joins going on. It's been quite continuous. Don't be afraid of unraveling it. Unraveling it, then pulling it off into a hank, giving it a good soak while we've got this lovely autumnal weather, then getting out, re-drying it, and then rehanking it or recaking it and using it again. I mean, it's pointless having something sitting in the naughty corner for forever, or a garment that you've knitted sitting in a wardrobe that you just don't love, you just don't wear. You may as well repurpose that yarn and do something else with it. It's a really super easy thing to do. I know people that have gone to op shops and seen projects in there, things knitted, but actually, especially even things like beautiful handspun. I've seen this when I've gone to op shops, stunningly beautiful handspun garments that have just sort of gone into the op shop. I have been known before today, particularly if it's something that won't fit anyone in our family, I have actually been known to go and purchase it, unravel it, and then re-knit it into something else. Saves me having to spin it. But, you can, there's nothing stopping you repurposing or redoing that. And all it needs generally is a good soak and dry it out, and then, a minimum amount of work, and you've got that yarn again. So, yeah, definitely a fun thing to do. So thanks for that question, Jo. And I'll just check down here. We've got no questions here before I launch onto the next one. Debbie. Debbie is saying, how do I take measurements correctly, shoulders and bust? That's a big question, a really big question. Libby Johnson does a whole 3-hour session on it, so I'm going to give you, Debbie, the super uber truncated version. So yeah, the two things in terms of shoulders and bust. Now let me move back. Yep, we can see there. Right. I hope everyone can see. One of the fatal mistakes, and I made this mistake for years until I read a book on fit, and then I was like, oh, I so now know why these things aren't fitting me like they used to. And that is because, and as you can see my bust there, I would always take my bust measurement from about here. Because to me, it was like, I'll take my bust measurement to the widest point on my bust. Now, I am a fairly average sized gal in terms of bust, not in terms of the rest of me. She's very above average, the rest, but the bust is quite average. And so I would take it to here because that was, I thought, the widest point. But as you can see, in terms of the width of the bust and the width of the shoulders, there is actually not a difference there. And one of the most frustrating things, and this is the mistake I fell into for years, is I'd take this measurement here, and back in those days too, patterns would not often say how much positive ease it would have. You would actually have to eyeball that from the photo. And I'll get onto ease in a second. And what was happening is I would knit these projects, and this one isn't one of them, but I have knit actually some earlier Miss Janes, and they kept falling off the shoulders all the time. And I couldn't figure out why, and it was driving me crazy. And it wasn't until I'd read a tutorial on measurements, and I realized I was just doing it all wrong. And what I should have been doing, and this lace panel is actually situated just at the right place, I now take my bust measurement from here. So when it comes to a finished measurement for the bust, I always look at the upper bust measurement. So I don't take it from here, I take it from here. And I've found by doing that, I then get a vastly more accurate representation in terms of the fit for the shoulders. The other measurement that I will quite often take, I'll take two other measurements quite often. If it's top down, I don't panic about the length quite so much because I can actually check that out as I'm going. If it is bottom up, I will then make a decision. I'll look at the design and then I'll make a decision, where do I want that design to finish or fit on me? So I'm going to stand up and hopefully you can see that. Fortunately, I've worn the right thing for this question today, Debbie, so that's good. I actually knitted this cardigan specifically for this dress, and it's because you can probably see in here there's this lovely little pinky flower, and I had this yarn same. So when I did this cardigan, this is Miss Jane. Oh, it's all kinky winky. The nice thing about Miss Jane is it's knit from this top portion and then you're continuing to work down, right? So I can adjust the length of this Miss Jane to wherever I want it. So because I was knitting it specifically for this dress, I know that I wanted this to finish basically right at my waist, because as you can see, I have a very generous bottom. It's always been there. I've grown quite used to it over the years. It ain't going anywhere. So I wanted this to finish as something quite cropped at the waist so it would bring me in. So that was quite a defined decision. So as far as this pattern goes, those were the two measurements that I was concerned about. However, there are sometimes if I'm making other garments in the top down, particularly with a set-in sleeve, and Rambler is actually going to be a really good example of this, because I have used a different shoulder armhole and shoulder measurement from the bust measurement that I've selected. So that measurement, I will often take the measurement around this part of my arm, and then I'll often take the measurement from the top of my shoulder here to the bottom of my armpit. And that's when, and it depends on the schematics that they have, but that's when I will then often see what the measurement on these are, like from the neck or from that top of the shoulder down, because sometimes it is actually quite long. And you may find that it's like, oh, that's going to be drooping. And the last thing you want is an armhole that's hanging down here. And and it needs to be fitted up there. The other time, I find yokes are a little bit more difficult because obviously they're working on a sloping sort of shoulder situation, which is really pretty for colour work, but not necessarily the most flattering. And I'm going to be really intrigued to see how this sits and looks on me, because as you can see, I'm quite square-shouldered. So for me, having patterns with more of a set-in shoulder quite often will be more flattering. And with Rambler, I've actually made sure, because the fact that it is a yoke in there, and for me that's not necessarily a good thing, I actually checked the number of stitches when I got to the armhole portion there. I've actually reduced that, and I've actually gone, did I reduce it or did I increase it? No, I'm telling you, big pork pies, that's right. I went in for the measurement that I've done for the chest. It was actually a bit pinchy, and I've actually gone and made sure that I've kept a couple of extra stitches in there just for a weeny bit more movement. But what I did do, this is what I did do, is they had me doing more rapid decreasing through this portion of the underarm here. And as you can see, I'm actually quite linear there, and the last thing I wanted was for that armhole to get too fitted, because it would get uncomfortable. So I actually made sure this actually asked for decreasing to start pretty much immediately from this portion here. Well, I didn't do that. In fact, I didn't start decreasing under my armhole until up to about here. Then I gently started doing my decreasing. So those are the little tricks. The biggest one, though, is starting with that upper bust, checking your length and how long you want your garment. And then, and I will do that, particularly this measurement from the top of the shoulder to the bottom of the armhole. That one is quite useful. If you've got a garment with a schematic, so it's done in pieces, and you can, I'm just grabbing my magical book of tricks here. Actually, I could probably show you on an old diagram I've already drawn. One of the ways you can tell, particularly if you're doing, and drop shoulders are a really classic case in this. So this is just a drop shoulder diagram. But if you've got like your sleeve, and I mean, if you've got a set-in sleeve, it will often then have, let's find you a new one. A set-in sleeve will often, drawing skills are not the best today, will often look like that, right? Well, you can actually look at, they generally will give you measurements. The really good patterns will give you measurements there, and they'll give you measurements there. And so that will be often what will sit across that top of the shoulder cap. That's what goes down up underneath the armhole. So you can actually check that length there. You can check the width across there. And you can just, it depends on how much ease you want to do, but it's one of those things, if you've got a schematic there, I will often just take those measurements that I want to do, and then I will jot them in pencil. Like if I've printed the pattern out, I'll jot them in pencil next to that schematic. And then I often will make calculations as I go. Sometimes I change them, sometimes I don't. But yeah, in terms of the measurements, that's what I take to sort of keep me going. I hope that made sense. To be honest with you, Libby explains this so much better than I do. So when we get Can up and running, we'll have her redo her knit to fit to class. Trust me, it's worth every cent. Right, Suzanne has got, since you asked, ladies garment pattern for Crucci Angora. Bought a cardigan lot a few years back, wasn't sure given the conversation about pilling. Thank God, cold and raining here in Canberra. Now, if the Crucci Angora is the one that I'm thinking of, I've got a funny feeling that was, I think, like a 5-ply. I've got a funny feeling, Suzanne, if you can let me know. So it's really just having a look at the gauge, having a look at the meterages that you've got, and actually in just doing, I quite often, if I'm sort of a bit, like if I've got yarn, I will often work backwards with what I've got. So I'll look at the meterage that I've got in the yarn. I'll look at the gauge, recommended gauge in the yarn. If this is the Angora that I'm thinking of, it was an Angora yarn that, there's two, but if it's one I'm thinking of, it's one that's a woolen spun one. So the Angora is not actually sitting out quite as high and proud. It's actually a little bit more trapped into the yarn. It's really, really lovely. And we sold a bit of it at the shop. So then I'll have a look at that and go, right, a cardigan actually would work quite nicely with that. But I check the gauge recommendation on the yarn, and I make sure that I choose a garment that is as close to that gauge recommendation as possible, and possibly even a little bit more conservative. So if the gauge recommendation on the yarn is 22 stitches to 10 centimeters in terms of the width, I will then look at garments that will be 22 to 24 stitches, because with Angora you want to make sure that your fabric, or the cover factor is what they call it in terms of that, is actually on the firmer side than on the looser side, because whenever you're dealing with a short fiber, Angora, possum, any of those, if it's a garment particularly for you to wear yourself, like a sweater or a cardigan, you do need to make sure that your gauge is what I would call conservative as opposed to generous. If you were choosing a shawl or a scarf or a wrap, really doesn't matter, or a snood or anything like that, because the friction points in those garments are very, very mild. You don't have a lot of friction points, but when you're dealing with a cardigan, yes you do. You've got friction points under your arms, friction points under your breast, and depending on the length of the cardigan, friction points across the back of your back and along the base of the cardigan. So when I then do that, what I will then do, and I don't know how down the rabbit hole you are with Ravelry, is I will then take that advanced search in Ravelry, and then I'll put in cardigan, I'll put in the weight of the yarn that I know that will give me that rough tension. I'll put in the meterage that I'm after. I always select obviously free, available for purchase, but also what's in my library as well. I've got so many. I'm a bit slack actually. I haven't got all my books listed in my Rav library, but I've got a number of them. But quite often what I'll find is that there'll be a pattern in there. It'll narrow it down. I'll put in age as well, like I want it for adults and not for a child, and then I narrow that down, and then I actually go through what is actually there. And if all else fails, Suzanne, I find what is closest to what I want. So for argument's sake, with that Critchy Angora, and I got a sneaking suspicion it's 5-ply or sport weight, but I could be, or at the lighter end of DK. And I'll just see if you've answered that question for me later. DK, she's saying, right, perfect. Then see something like this would be perfect for that. In fact, this would be good. This is Miss Jane Summer Carnival would be good. But I quite like these sorts of really simple pop-over style. It's a really nice lightweight yarn as well. It's not too dense. So I just find these style of cardigans. Actually, the pop crop cardigan from Amber O'Brien is another really good one that I would consider if you're looking for a little cardigan. Or Libby talked about Timely, which was her just classic striped cardigan piece. Now that is actually written in a 4-ply or fingering weight. But to be honest with you, there's absolutely no reason, if you can do the basic maths, that you do that into a DK, but it is the yarn that I'm thinking of. It is actually at the finer end of DK, that yarn. So just check your meterages. If you've got the meterages, do it in how it's written, if you've got the meterage to do it. Right, another one that I got earlier on is from Aranan, and she's asked any tips or tricks for colour work gauge. Hers is ridiculously tight even after going up multiple needle sizes. And I also noticed that there was a question on that this morning as well with Southlander for colour work on the Speakeasy. Now, Ethan is, I might actually even get him to cover this on Saturday because he's a real master at this. We've all seen Ethan's floats. I mean, the boy is, when it comes to colour work, he is the noise. I've done a little bit of colour work here and there. There's two things that I can tell you is that when you're doing colour work, don't get too panicked before it's blocked. There is an old saying that is that shit will just block straight out. And with colour work, that quite often is true. So as you can see here with mine, so I've got, I'm using 4 different yarns. One of those yarns, the Noro, is a completely different construction to the other 3. The other 3 are almost identical constructions, right? So there you are there. And as you can see, it isn't completely perfect. Now, I didn't change my needle size, but it does say that you can do that. I didn't change my needle size. Now for Ethan, the way he handles this is he actually holds, if it's 2-color stranded work, he holds a strand in either side because he sort of has a very effective, I think he tell me if I'm wrong, Ethan, but I've got a funny feeling you're continental. My knitting style is very cumbersome. But what I do is I do hold everything, and I try to keep, it's more, I'm not so concerned about this because I know that this will actually block out quite well, but it's this that I am worried about more. So those are my floats, which actually for me are not too bad. So those are my floats. And what I do is that she's saying, I just don't tend to pull it. Like I just try to keep the tension as normal as I possibly can. I find it's easier to get this even tension when you're working colour work in the round, for sure, than what it is if you're working flat and having to go backwards and forwards, because you're changing a direction when you purl, and there is like entire tutorials about alterations and gauge on between purling and knitting. But I just tend to, as I'm moving the colour work through, I just try to keep a really even rhythm and tension. And when I go to do it and I move to each float, and quite often I will do this, is I will then get the work and just have it sit to how it would be if it would be blocked, to see if those floats are sitting flat. And as you're working them, so you might be working them, you could be all bunched up like that, and you think, oh, those floats are too loose, those are too loose. But when you actually lay them, sit yourself out and lay them flat, they're not. So, yeah, so that's what I do. So don't, if you're a bit worried, Ari, if you're a little bit worried, what you can do is knit yourself a weenie swatch, whether it just be a little tube, if it's something in the round, or if it's a flat piece, just do it. I mean, take an hour or two to do that and actually play around with the different needles, and then actually wash it and block it and see what it looks like. And that might just give you the confidence to, if you haven't already started, to go, oh, okay, yes, no, I am on the right track. That's what I can do. So it's like a lot of things. Preparation, if a little bit of time spent on preparation can actually save you from a lot of heartache later on. I apologize for all the banging and crashing. We've got a construction site next door. It's kind of nice though, after it being like deathly quiet for weeks and weeks and weeks, to actually have the sound of activity around you. Right. What else have we got here? Just wondering the cardigan pattern that you've used for the cardigan that I'm wearing. Right, Cheryl, yes, Miss Jane from Georgie Nicholson. And I will actually get the rev up right now because I know that there's bound to be a question that someone's going to ask me on this as well. And then I'll put that right into the comments for you. It is one of my go-to cardigans. It was a knit along that Georgie did years ago. When did she publish it? There you go, 2012. I've done about 8 of these, I suppose. It's kind of one of my go-to. Oh, there we go. Oh, right, there we go. It's one of my sort of go-to cardigans. What I like about it is it's a really quick knit, really quick knit. She's it's actually quite clever, because she's actually the shoulder shape, and you actually, this is your cast on edge here. So as you can see by the arms, it's actually worked in that direction, and then you pick stitches up along here and create this lace panel. So from a construction perspective, it's very simple and straightforward, very fast to knit. And I have honestly done every variation in this. This one is obviously a sort of a half sleeve. I've done crop sleeves, I've done 3/4 sleeves, I've done full sleeves, I've done different lengths. I've done, in recent times, I've mostly done bolero cropped waist length, and that's because I wear a lot of maxi dresses and tunics, and I just find that length of cardigan for those garments are perfect. But I do actually have a couple of them which are longer and what I would call hip bone length, which I then wear with slacks and trousers and jeans and things like that. And that's, I love a pattern that gives me a huge amount of versatility, and this is one of them. You've got this lace panel here. You don't actually have to do this little bit of a lace panel. I know other people, and I think Heather's in the chat today. I think you've done this, I know, in garter stitch or moss stitch, haven't you, Heather? A lot of people will do that panel in moss stitch, like what we have here, to give you a bit, to change it out. And then this portion through the bottom here, you can actually, it's easy to add colour into it. It's easy to put in a different stitch pattern. You can actually play around with it quite a bit. So I just find it a really versatile pattern, and it doesn't take a lot. Like, I mean, I can do one of these Miss Janes, like this cropped version. I think it only took about 8 balls a DK for my size. So it's really straightforward. Solange is wanting to know, what are the new yarns in store for this year? What yarns are suitable for Tenpai patterns other than outlaw worsted? I'll start with the easy one first, which is what yarns are suitable for Tenpai patterns other than outlaw worsted. Lodge, when you can get it. So we have got, I think, a teensy bit of Lodge left, which is our Aran. We haven't been able, the viscose that created that wonderful net, we can't get at the moment, but we are going to be doing, even Lodge might just end up turning into the same lovely colour range, but without the tweedy bit. We haven't quite decided, but there will be a specific 10-ply pattern yarn that will remain under that banner. The other yarn, actually, for 10-ply patterns, a lot of 10-ply patterns will work on 18 to 20 stitch to 10 centimetre gauge. That seems to be the common gauge, and they'll use from a 4mm to 5mm needle, and 4.55mm seems to be the most common needle sizes for those patterns. Southland DK is at the heavier end of DK. It's made in a sort of a more rustic form, and I find Southland DK translates just fine into any of those Aran White patterns without any issues whatsoever. In fact, we had a Sadie cardigan, which is from Norgon, for years as our sample in at the shop, and that was done, it was a 10-ply pattern on a 5mm needle, and it was no problems whatsoever, absolutely gorgeous. So particularly if you've got something that is quite rustic and in cables and what have you, I would look at Southlander DK for that for sure. And then if this gauge is sort of to 20 stitches, you can actually get away with a lot of our DKs, like our particularly the more rustic non-treated DKs. So Perrindale will work well. Actually Pearl will work very well because it's not treated, and that's actually got a little bit of buoyancy and give to it. And even Sock Mortician DK. They will go out to a 20 stitch tension relatively comfortably without losing integrity and the like. But so that's for those. What new yarns have we got coming to store for the year? A lot of our plans, of course, have been thrown out a little bit out of whack with the current situation. We did manage to get Cozy and Snug in for the sale, which is our essentially very, very similar to Southlander DK and Southlander Sport, but in pure bright rainbow shades, so solid shades, rainbow shades. So they're already there now. And we've got coming up a super fine, you may have heard Peter mention this, a super fine kid mohair, which is, I've got a funny feeling Stephen actually was going through the mill before things closed, and that is going to be there for all those patterns where you're needing to double strand back with a full ply, or if you've got something special and you've been looking for a mohair. Getting hold of those mohairs, like commercial mohairs, has been actually really, really tricky. So we're going to do, it's a limited colour range, but it will be absolutely beautiful, and it will be that really good skeins pricing as well. So that's probably the next yarn to come. And then we've just got some range extensions. We've got some new shades on the board for a number of a number of yarns. They're all fines. We've managed to get those in. You've seen those. And we've got a couple of others that we're just sort of playing around with at the minute, but I haven't had a chance to have a sit-down new product development meeting with Peter yet, because obviously things have changed this year, and we may need to a lot of our focus will be in making sure we get back our core ranges in stock, as well as new product development. So that's what we've got coming up for the meantime. There we go. Oh, Vicky, love the dress. I've got the same one. Yeah. Should we tell them when we got it from Vicky? I don't know. I'm assuming you got yours from the same place I got mine. I think I paid $15. It came out for years ago, and I thresh it. Wear it all the time. It's really comfy. What is the weight? Oh, what is the weight in the hank of the cadenza? Have I got that here? Have I gone and sent? I've sent that back. It's a DK yarn, and it is, I think, in a 100-gram hank. The cadenza. Is that one? Yes, Kathy's saying Maree. Yes, Maree from Vintage Pearls. She also does a very good. She calls it Beyond the B Cup. She does a very good fit class as well. If you ever go to either Unwind or Can, and she has done that class. Right. Deborah has asked. I have some heritage kid mohair and stash for a cardigan. How will it perform when blocked? Is there special care that I should take? Right, now that is a 50-50 kid mohair and organic merino. It took me a while there to remember what it was. Yarn. It is hand wash is the first thing. It will perform really well when blocked. It is definitely a drapier yarn. The reason it's 50-50, so with the kid mohair is very, very fine, but it is quite a long staple. And it's got this beautiful lustrous sheen. So if any of you have got that yarn in the stash, it almost looks like silk. It's very shiny, very glossy. So it will give you a beautiful shiny garment in hand. Oh, in fact, hold the phone. I've got something in it here. I do have a sample of that if I can dig it out quickly. Here we go. Oh, thank goodness it was at the top. In my bags of tricks that are sitting here in the she shed. So this was the Dahlia colourway. So that's it there, knitted up. So I've knitted this on a 4mm needle. So what I would say, Deborah, with this is don't stretch your tensioning capabilities too far on this. So I wouldn't go beyond a 22 stitch tension. So anything that sits in the realm of 24 to 22 stitches I think will be best for this yarn, because you're doing a cardigan. If you're doing a shawl or anything like that, don't panic, just go with it. But if you're doing a cardigan, because as you can see, it is incredibly soft. It is lovely and drapey. It will block beautifully. And actually it's relatively easy care. I mean, this is a hat that was a sample in the shop for years. It's only ever been washed once. I've worn it heaps because it's a colour that I love. And as you can see, it's wearing very, very well. I know if Wilma's watching, I know she has, was it Joe? One of you I know has knitted a lot in this yarn. But yeah, no, just make sure it's hand washed. But don't go too relaxed on the gauge. That's the only thing I would say with that yarn. Don't go too relaxed on the gauge. Oh, there we go. See, Mary's beat me to it. She said she's knitted a crop cardigan with a heritage kid mohair, blocked well, gorgeous to wear, just keep the gauge a little tighter. See, onto it, Mary. That's exactly right. Yeah, Sylvia's saying she watched Ethan, extra teacher. He is a right-hander. He is right dominant, but he's got a really interesting way. See, he's double stranding with that, but when he does colour work, and I might get him actually to cover off some of his colour work stuff on Saturday, he carries his yarn in both hands, and he keeps telling me that that's what I should do, but I've got a very cumbersome old-fashioned chucking method, and I've tried relearning and I've tried doing continental, and what works for me. And yeah, it's not very elegant, but it works. Oh, there we go. That's actually great advice from Sylvia. She's saying if you're having a problem with colour work being too tight, you could do some colour work socks, turn your work inside out and knit the colour work that way. It finds that I keep the tension more even and closer to the non-colour work. That's a really good piece of advice, Sylvia. And colour work is one of those, I mean, it's like anything, it's practice. The more practice you do, the better that it gets. I also find too, grippier yarns help better with colour work. My colour work always looks so much better on a grippier yarn than it does on like a shrink treated superwash yarn, because they're a little bit more slinkier, and they just, the minute they don't look 100% perfect, your eye's drawn to it, whereas rustic yarns look rustic, so it's not quite so bad. This is great. Lots of questions. It's fabulous. Oh, there we go. So you guys are giving each other advice now. This is fantastic. It's really good for me. Jill, I like full ply wool. I like full ply wool, but what would you adjust it for double knitting patterns? Good question, Jill. So it's just basically simple math. So what I tend to do is most 4-ply yarns, and it depends on the 4-ply yarn. If it's something like this, which is a shrink treated, this is skein soft, or it's the same as our merino soft. Shrink treated, merino soft isn't shrink treated, but it's the same count. A finer standard merino 4-ply, 4-fold 4-ply. This has a tension of around 28 stitches to 10 centimeters. But you also have yarns like Legacy, which is just a little bit, it's just got a little bit more bounce to it. Still has that same suggested tension. What I have a tendency to do is that I will then take, if you're wanting to do it in a DK pattern, I would definitely check your gauge. So firstly decide what needle you want to knit it on. So if you've got a DK pattern and you've got a yarn, say like this, for example, generally we recommend a 3.25 millimeter needle, but you can actually squeak up to a 3.5 without any issues whatsoever. But decide on what your main needle is going to be. Then knit a swatch and seed needle, and then take your measurement. And it will be somewhere, depending on the needle size that you've chosen, anywhere between 26 to 28 stitches within Kui. Once you know what that number is, then you need to just do a percentage difference between that and the gauge in your DK pattern. So if the gauge in your DK pattern is 22 stitches and you've got a 6 stitch difference because your gauge is 28 stitches, or it could be a 5 stitch difference if you ended up with 27 stitches, whatever it may be, and you just work that percentage difference out. So that is just roughly, this rough maths, around 20%. So then you take your DK pattern and you look at your DK pattern and your series of sizings, and you just need to adjust and make sure that you knit a DK pattern that is, and I need to always get this the wrong way around. If you're going to 4-ply, you need to be knitting a 28 stitches. You need to be knitting you need more stitches, so you need to be knitting bigger. Yes, down yarn, up size. So you need to be selecting going 20% bigger than what you would normally do if you're doing it as a DK. So if you're doing, say for argument's sake, 40-inch, 20% on 40-inch takes you to 48-inch. So you want to be doing the 48-inch size in your 4-ply yarn. And then you just need to take aware of those key measurement points. So you need to take, and generally if it offers you advice in terms of measurements, you need to do X number of measurements to get to where you need to be, you're generally pretty golden. If they actually offer you work X number of rows then change, which they sometimes do, that you will need to be a little bit more careful of, because that row distance you'll need to adjust whatever that is by 20%. So it's just a matter of being a little bit more mindful about the pattern. I go up and down and move patterns all the time, and I generally find that once I get started, it's often the getting started part that you need to do, that I make modifications as I go, add stitching in or length in, or alter decreasing to suit. But yeah, as a rough rule of thumb, that's the rough knit maths that I would work on if you're wanting to alter those back from one to the other. Roxana has asked, can you please advise on a suitable sweater cardi ideals for Pearl Luster? I had a look at Ravelry, but nothing inspired me. It's such a beautiful yarn. It showed the luster of it. Now, the first one with Pearl Luster is we did ranunculus in it, which is Midori, I think Midori Hiroshi. And ranunculus, let me just actually pull this up. I'll pull it up for you. Should I pull it up for you? Let's pull it up. Maree. There it is. Now, she has hers. She's done hers. She's got one in a very fine, she had it pictured in a very, very fine, lacy silk tweed. And so we did ours in our ranunculus in Pearl Luster, and it looks amazing. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the finished garment. So that... Oh God, press the wrong button, Maree. Press the wrong button. Come on, you know you want to. There we go. And it looked incredible. However, it is a very, very fine lace weight yarn. The other yarn I would actually consider is, and I think it is called Huia by Libby. I'll just have a little look for you. Libby Johnson's got a really lovely, really lovely fine weight cardigan that we had a little play around with, and we thought, ooh, Pearl Luster would look really good in that. I think it was Huia. Yes, Huia is definitely one to consider. So Huia is using, she uses a 3-ply. It's a 27 stitch gauge, so you could actually use a 4-ply in that, but it's designed in such a way that we think that that would actually work quite nicely in that yarn, and we just thought that that was really, really sweet. And I think this was the other one that we quite like. Yeah, and the other one that we thought it's more fitted would work quite well was Itsumo, which is she put out in April of 2018. Again, a 27 stitch tension. If you can find it, the trick with it would be to find, I would be looking at tensions from 28 to 30 stitches per 10 centimeters. Those are really, really fine tensions if you're looking for a garment. And if you're wanting to show that sheen, and then that will actually show it as a fabric. So put that in your Ravelry search as one of your criteria. The other option is to go the ranunculus direction and actually do something quite ethereal. And actually the other cardigan, and I think it was called the Whisper cardigan, I think it's henna fitting. Let me have a look. That might also would be another one that would work quite well. Let's have a look. Yeah, henna fitting. There we go. Oh gosh, I do like it when my, yes. Now she has gone and knitted this using a lace weight yarn, and I know someone who's actually knitted this pattern a few times, and it looks incredible. And that Pearl Luster would look amazing in this cardigan. It would work really, really well. So those are a couple of ones that to try out. But again, come down to, I would one of the things I would do is actually start knitting some swatches. So get out your different needles, knit swatches, do some different stitches on there, so do a stocking stitch swatch. In terms of showing the luster for something, I find often smooth fabric quite good, but play around. Don't get the wool out. You've got meterage for miles, and do stocking stitch, do some garter stitch, do some moss stitch, put some ribbing in there, and just do a panel with a whole bunch of different stitching. Play around with different needle sizes and just see how the yarn is performing in a fabric and what you actually like, and then take that and then apply it across some different patterns that you can see. Well, you know what, you could even, once you've done that, you could actually look at that and go, okay, how do I template this? Do I actually create something that I want to do myself and use the techniques that I've learned in other things? So yeah, that would be something that I would definitely check out. What's the kind of softness? What kind of softness is the yarn by Stephen B's multicolored stuff? Pretty soft, actually, Lee. Yeah, it's mid-micron 20s, good handle. Yeah, it sort of sits between. It sort of sits between Urban Deluxe and Albertine. It's in there, in that range. Yeah. Linda's asked, an interview I did with Peter the other day, he mentioned providing yarn to Spotlight and Oz. Can you tell us what those brands are, please? We do yarn for Wentworth distributors, and they sell a lot of yarn back to Spotlight. So the yarn that we produce for them goes to Spotlight. Waikiwi being one of them. We've also done their Naturally, I think they've got K2, which is their new 12-ply yarn, and one other, but Lemmermore, which is their new organic single farm origin yarn, and I think those ones are available at Spotlight as well as other clients. So I think those were the newer yarns that we've done for them, which have gone there. Right. There we go. Jeanette has done ranunculus and pearl luster. It looks fantastic. Right. Alrighty. I've just got. What's the time? Oh, yeah, we've been at it for ages. I'll just make sure I've got no other questions on here. Oh, one other question. It was, do I always have to block? I've never washed or blocked any of my knitting. I knit mostly for children and for babies. Short answer is no, you don't have to. I mean, we don't want to make you do anything. And look, I'll put my hands up. I didn't even know. I didn't know what blocking was. I didn't know what blocking was until I really dove back into knitting about 17 or 18 years ago. I was like, what's this blocking they keep referring to? I just ignored it. What I did do, I never wet blocked anything. I used to actually press everything, though. I always found when because I did nothing in the round. Everything I did was worked flat and in pieces, and I sewed it up. I do have an unhealthy fetish with mattress stitch. I love it. It's my favourite stitch in the whole wide world. So I have to admit, every now and then I will do a seamed garment just so I can do some mattress stitching. Anywho, to mattress stitch effectively, to see where I need to go to pick the bars up to effectively stitch it, I just found it was always so much easier to do that when each one of those pieces had been pressed. So I always would lay all my pieces out onto a towel and with an iron and just lightly press it with a steam function on the iron and flatten everything out. And everything I knit was in 100% wool, so it coped with that just fine. And then I later found out that that in itself is a form of blocking. So if you're knitting mostly for toddlers and babies, to be honest with you, if you're knitting pieces flat like that, actually just pressing it or steaming it is more than adequate. If you're knitting pieces completely or seamlessly, wet blocking is actually really, really useful in making sure that everything gets in there and sits there. And you just, I keep it very, very simple when it comes to children's garments and stuff like that. All you're really wanting to do is have all that stitching just relax into place. There's not really a huge amount of shaping or manipulation that's required when it comes to small garments like that. So literally, sorry, I'm a bit husky today. Soaking all the garments, rolling it out in the towel, just as you would if you were hand washing it, and just laying it out without stretching it how you want it to dry. Sorry, and allowing it to dry. Where blocking, I think, really comes into its own is if you are starting to play around outside of normal gauge recommendations. So, for example, if you're knitting something which is either much firmer or much looser than a standard recommendation, and you actually need to get an idea of how a garment will perform at those recommendations, then I definitely would recommend gauging or swatching that yarn into that gauge, and then I will always either do a blocked swatch or seam it just to see what it looks like blocked as well, because depending on how much you're pushing that gauge can change it quite a bit. And obviously, if you're a shawl knitter or a lace knitter, or there's anything with points, particularly lace, blocking in lace is utterly transformative, because you will often be knitting with something really wonderful and fine like the pearl luster on these much bigger needles, and you're doing these yarn overs and knit two togethers, and you have this kind of bubbly, crinkly looking, funny looking fabric, and you think to yourself, how on earth is that going to ever transform itself into something wonderful? And it's not until you soak that and then you lay it out on a board and you pin it to the shape, and particularly if it's got points at edges, and you allow that to dry, and it is honestly, it is a joy to behold. So in answer to your question, no, you don't have to block everything, but there are times, especially if you're working with lace especially, or colour work, like we've talked stranded colour work, where blocking can make a huge difference to the overall fit and effect of your garment. So I hope that answers your question. Righty. Right, I think it was me. Yes. So with any luck, Rachel will be here. She she apologizes profusely that she wasn't able to make it today, but if all goes according to plan, she will be here tomorrow. So that'll be the wonderful Rachel here, and you guys are going to get a twofer, because we'll have Rachel, and then the following day, of course, I'll be joined, as always on a Saturday, by the wonderful Ethan Barclay from Outlaw Yarns. So until then, have a great what day is it? Thursday. Have a great Thursday, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.